Hey there, welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel, and today we're going to talk about social encounters. So, I'm taking a course over at the Storytelling Collective about writing adventures for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. I decided to take that one versus there was Call of Cthulhu, and there was also just kind of a generic one, because I thought it would be interesting to kind of delve back into that. I haven't played 5e in a while now, but it was what kind of brought me back into the hobby. But what made me think of, though, is because we're talking about the pillars, if you will, or the parts of the game, and social is one of those, right? And writing up encounters and saying things like, well, if you talk to the shopkeep and you succeed in a persuasion check, you'll get a good deal, that kind of thing, right? And it reminded me of the fact that when I got back into playing, I remember looking at a lot of blogs, some YouTube videos, and a lot of people who see now, I think, because I know what I know, possibly these people had not played as much old school games or any old school games, and they were just reading them. And one of the major things they would say is that all the old school games were about were combat, because that's what all the rules were. There were no rules for social, so clearly people just ran around killing stuff, and they were murder hobos. That is not how I remembered it, and I think I've talked about this before. And over time, as I started to talk to more people, I realized that, no, I remembered what we did correctly. I wasn't a unique person. People did do social. They did all these things. So why do people think that? Like, what is it that makes them feel a certain game has more social and some doesn't? Now, I think that this has to do with the fact that if you're new to a rule set and you look at something, what seems to be focused on is what they think the game is about, they being anybody, or me even, right? And this is, an easy mistake to make. But that doesn't mean we didn't do social stuff. And to be honest, if you stick around long enough in the OSR type sphere, as they call it, and you're playing things like BX and original Dungeons & Dragons, you'll find that talking and negotiating and stuff is something you do way more than combat, because combat is very deadly. So how did I know, right? How did I know when I was a kid that that was something I could do? Because clearly the rules are all about fighting, right? Well, as always, let's take our dive, there's always a second, right, back into BX. So we're going to look at the Mulvey Basic Book, and let's see what it says about social. So we're looking at it here. This is actually in the encounter section, right there, encounters, right? Very beginning of the encounter section. It talks about, the process, but we're on page B24, if you're following along. And it says party actions. The first decision the party must make in an encounter is whether to fight, talk, or run. So clearly, or wait to see what the monsters will do. So clearly, the intent was always there, even in these older games, that you could talk, right? And it says if the party chooses to fight, combat begins. If the party chooses to talk, right? And if the monsters will listen, the DM plays the part of the monsters. The players can ask questions, make bold statements, and otherwise react to the creatures. The encounter may become peaceful, agreement, hurried, as the monster or party runs away, or violent, if the talk leads to combat. So here we are, right? We've got this idea that we can, in fact, talk to monsters, right, that we encounter. Remember that in the basic book, they're really covering dungeon crawls. This is not covering towns and encounters in the wilderness with farmers and stuff. This is really about dungeons. So this is saying the denizens of the dungeon, your orcs, your kobolds, your lizard folk, your whatever that can speak some kind of a language. They're not oozes, obviously. They might be willing to talk. Now, there's not many rules or any rules really talking about that, and I'm not sure there needs to be. I guess this is where kind of maybe just the type of person you are or how you think of games will affect how this works for you. So if we look at the idea that the book is telling us when you encounter things, you have some options. You can talk, you can fight, you can run. And then it gives rules for combat and even rules for running, but not rules for talking. How do you know what to do? Well, I believe, and this is the way we handle it, is that people talk all the time, right? That's just what we do. And by playing the role, the dungeon master puts themselves in the role of the NPC in the case of, let's say they come into a room and there's a bunch of orcs in there, and the orcs are, in this room. Now, what the Dungeon Master has to be on top of is, why are the orcs in the room? Who are these orcs? Is the orc leader there? Is this a squad of orcs, or is it just some group hanging out? Is it a family unit? Would they be nervous that they need to defend their treasure because this is their home? Are they exploring as well? Are they just on patrol? Is this a neutral area where lots of things come and go? These are the things the Dungeon Master has to know, or at least come up with, right, when they run into this encounter. They're going to want to think about, okay, let's imagine we roll this as a random encounter. So we've got this cave system. It's an old tomb. It's full of zombies and skeletons and oozes and stuff like that. And you roll on your random encounter table and you get orcs. So now you've got 8 orcs in this location. What might the orcs be doing there? It's likely not their home. It's unlikely that these orcs are going to live amongst the undead, right? So they might also be exploring. So maybe they're not so quick to attack the party if they can either ally with them or just get away peacefully without having to risk their lives. Because remember, everybody wants to stay alive, right? You have to think of the monsters, even when they're monsters, even when they're lizard folk or orcs or whatever, if you can think of those things as monsters. Even though they may not have the same desires as, let's say, the player characters, they do have some desires, right? So on the spot, you're going to have to kind of come up with this. Now, if you're not that person that can come up with that stuff on the fly very easily, I would say make a quick list that you can roll on. Just jot down some words ahead of time. There's lots of ways to kind of be prepared for this. I almost always, personally, roll with the direction the party takes. Meaning that if I haven't determined what this wandering monster is there for, and the party encounters some orcs and they try to negotiate, very rarely am I going to say, oh no, they just stab you in the face. Now, you can use the reaction roll, of course, and that's totally fine. And in fact, in the example of play, that's what they do, right? They roll the reaction roll against the hobgoblins, and it does end up being combat. So there is a rule there for that. But I would urge people to not necessarily roll a reaction roll if they don't feel like it's necessary. I like to think about what my players enjoy, right? And it's funny because as I say, I'm taking this course and talking about the pillars, right? So you've got your social, you've got your exploration, you've got your combat. And most of the time you're going to have a mixed party that's going to enjoy different things. I mean, a lot of players like all of it, right? So you don't want to never have a combat, but if you have a group that loves exploration and social and their combat is not their favorite thing, then leaning in the direction of monsters not attacking them is probably going to make for a happier table. It's going to create the stories, if you want to call it that your group will enjoy. If you looks like an email. If your group is the kind that loves fighting and they like the war of it and they're there to slay the evil creatures, then that's fine. Then you could even have the creatures possibly cower and beg to put the kind of a moral dilemma on there. You could have them try to be treacherous so that things lead to combat. You got to get a feel for your group and where they're going to be at. If you don't really know, if it's a new group or you're new to this and people aren't really sure, then a straight reaction roll I think is totally fine. And as I've talked about before, a reaction roll doesn't have to mean exactly what it says, right? We can take it and roll with it to kind of determine something else if it doesn't make sense. I check out the video that I did on orcs always attack first, or do they? I think is what I call it. So what we want to do in social, though, is we want to think about why the creature, NPC, whatever, is there, what their motivations are, how strong they are, and how strong they believe they are versus the party, right? If the party, it comes in and they're all in heavy plate metal armor with pole arms and, they've got henchmen and they're super strong, and they come in and there's this band of orcs that maybe isn't so strong, they're more likely to, even if they don't really want to ally with the party, they're more likely to do it, right? Because they know that they're not going to be able to beat them necessarily. You look at the odds, right? If just like the party would, if they look at a group of 30, orcs and there's only 4 of them and they're already beat up, they're going to be more likely to try to run or negotiate than they are to charge in and fight, hopefully. So the enemy or the people they encounter, whether they be enemies or not, are going to be the same. So think of that. even though the games don't say specifically that here's the rules, roll persuasion, roll deception, just understand the motivations of the NPCs, understand what the party's trying to achieve, and if the social back and forth between you and your players goes in that direction, don't just roll some random dice and have them stab them in the face. Roll with it. Roll with it, right? Go with it. It's a game, right? It's a game where we're trying to tell a story in a certain sense, a collaborative story. So we don't want things to always go off kilter, right? We don't want like, oh man, I rolled that die, so now all of a sudden this great social encounter goes bad. Or you know what you could do? If you did that, you could have one of the orcs decide to attack. And now that creates a really interesting situation, right? Because maybe the other orcs stop it, and then that creates a little trust amongst the party, with the party and the orcs. So think about it as a DM. Think about the people that the monsters, the creatures, whatever you want to call them, that the party encounters. Think about what their motivations are, what their goals are, and that will heavily influence how they interact with the party. So I guess since I'm doing this orc thing, let me just do a quick example of some different options. And then I guess what I want to know below is some examples maybe where you guys have done great social stuff. And also, at the end, I'll do it at the end. I want to talk about some ideas for future videos. I just want to get some people's opinions on what you guys would like to see here. But let's just talk about the orcs for a second. Okay, so let's say that you've got a party of let's say 8 adventurers, maybe 4 PCs and 4 henchmen, right? And they're pretty strong. You got some fighters in there. You got some clerics. So you got some heavy armored guys and gals, and maybe possibly they're coming into this dungeon, and they encounter a small group of orcs. Let's say 4 orcs. Now, let's take a few different situations. Let's say this group of 4 orcs is in this chamber, and behind the chamber is there where they live, right? It has some, children, let's say, or non-combatants, older orcs or whatever. It has their treasure. This is basically their homestead. The party is coming into their home. They could react in any number of ways. It could be that they will fight immediately, or threaten, or negotiate and try to get the party to leave, right? There's lots of things that they could do, because if they look at the party of 8 characters coming in, there's only 4 of them. Even if they would rather not have the party come into their space, if they think they can't win, they're going to say, hey, listen, don't kill us. We're not doing anything. We're just living here peacefully. We've got this, information, or we have this gold we can give you, and be on your way. And, if your party is not a bunch of murder hobos, they might just take them up on that. And, that doesn't mean it's over there, right? Because the orcs might then go get their cousins, their 12 cousins that live 2 caves over, and follow the party deeper into the dungeon and ambush them later. And that might be when you roll a random orc encounter. That could be what that is, right? But these 4 orcs don't want to risk basically dying in that spot, but also the fact that once the party kills them, they're going to go back and, possibly have, slaughter their kin or whatever, right? So they don't want that to happen. They don't know the party. They don't know that they're lawful good, and they wouldn't do that. So they've got to think about their motivations. You got to think about their motivations. Now let's take the same 4 orcs, and let's say again we're in this tomb. So the orcs don't live there. They're also exploring. They see the party, right, as possibly a means of protection. Maybe there was more orcs before, and they actually got attacked by the zombies, and they've lost a few, right? But they see that there's some good treasure down there, and they were basically retreating. Now they run into 8 PCs. They might say, hey, you know what? Listen, we mean you no harm. We can tell you where there's some great treasure, but we got to tell you it's dangerous down there. Join us, and we'll split it up. And whether or not the orcs are going to, turn tail and run, or set the PCs up for something bad, that's, I'd be careful with that kind of stuff, but that's also an option, right? But at this point now we've got, again, friendly negotiation with the orcs, because they because they need the PCs. But now let's take another scenario. Let's say it's the same orcs that are traveling around. They got hit by the zombies earlier. They've retreated back to get their heal up or whatever in some side chamber. They see the party go by, but the party doesn't see them. Let's say we roll surprise, right? And the party is surprised, the orcs aren't. But they look and they say, okay, you know what? We're not going to attack this party. It's too big, so the orcs stay hidden, right? So you don't tell the party, obviously, that encounter happened. Now they go in, they fight the zombies, they get beat up, they're wounded, they lose their 4 henchmen. Now you've got 4 beat up PCs leaving with a bunch of loot, and the orcs are now waiting for them. They've healed up a bit. They may set up an ambush and attack the PCs. So it really kind of depends on how you want to play these out, and you can have different types of social encounters. They might come out and just attack the PCs, or they might come out and say, hey, we know you got that treasure. We lost people there too. We want our fair share for the zombies we killed before you got there. And now, again, it could become a social interaction. Anything that you do, for the most part, can become social if you want to lean in that direction. And if you feel like your players enjoy that stuff and they lean in that direction, give them that opportunity to do it. Don't say you walk into the room, there's 5 bugbears here, roll initiative. Get a feel for it. Let them feel it out and see if they can negotiate, if they can talk, if they can run. Let the players, unless they're surprised for an ambush, obviously, have an opportunity to be social. This is how the game was run when I was a kid. It's how we ran it, even though the books didn't have tons of rules on social. You know why? Because we read books, right? And we watched TV and watched movies, and we saw that's what happens. That's where the fun stuff is. So we just did it. We didn't need rules for that. So if you are new to the OSR and you're used to games that have more formalized, let's say Call of Cthulhu that has like charms, persuasion, and fast talk, or 5e that has like deception and persuasion, if you're used to those games and you're not really sure what to do, just try to forget about rules for a second and just kind of take the role, right, of the NPC, we'll call them in this case, the orcs, right? Take the role of them. What are they thinking? What is their motivation? What are they thinking? You don't need a rule book to tell you how to run the orcs. You know how to do it. So that's my advice. Let me know what you guys think. How do you do this kind of stuff? Subscribe, ring the bell, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you know what? I forgot to say. So I get a lot of requests to go through modules, which I know a lot of people do. So I kind of stay away from it. But if that's something you guys want to see me do, I might do like short, quick overview videos as opposed to like full on flip through thingies that people do. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Or would you rather see me like break down an entire module in chunks, how I would run it, what I think about it, and do that. So so that's the question. Maybe I'll make a poll too, but would you rather see me do 5 minutes of, hey, this is a great module, this is what I think is good about it, or would you rather see me do one or possibly multiple videos on how I would run that module for my party and changes I'd make and stuff like that? So let me know what you think there. Also, I was going to do a video about the Hateful Place, that's why I have it out, which I will do soon. I don't know, I suddenly had this idea about doing the social video because I was looking at my lesson in this storytelling thing, and I should have a 5e adventure written by the end of the month, so we'll see how that works out. It's really fun, actually, creating adventure for that system, because it does make you think a little differently than I do when I create adventures for my own party, right? Because when you are creating something for yourself, you can just write, there's an ogre in the room, and of course you know how you'd run an ogre. But if you're writing a module, you need to let the people read it and understand what your intent is for the ogre. So very cool, good stuff. Let me know what you guys think below, comments, questions, anything you guys want me to cover, and I'll see you next time.